Here. Okay, Steve Maanum is a wildlife photographer, outdoor educator, and master storyteller, sharing insights on loon life through the lens of his camera. So I think I'll just turn it over to Steve, and you guys can talk to him after the program too, but he has great qualifications and good stories. So let's see, end slideshow. I got to go through this orally because Sharon just taught me how to run her computer. There, and that should be yours, Steve. So,
yes, thank you. Thank you. I'm not sure with the lights if it would help at all to dim those or not, but we should be okay. As we get started, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. My biggest problem with talking about loons is shutting up. And I promise that by Tuesday noon we will be out of here. So, no. But as we get going, I want to, all the hours I spent on the lake looking for loons, I'm reminded by John Muir that there's a lot more to it. That, you know, every time you are out there on Long Lake too, you're seeing a lot of other things as well. And it's all part of the natural appreciation that we've been given to take care of. So just about a 2-minute little slideshow as I give you a little background to the, I don't live on Long Lake, but I did. When my wife and I moved here in 1976, I had been teaching in Moorhead, and I took a teaching job here in Park Rapids. Well, we didn't have kids yet, we didn't have a home, we were looking for some place to rent. And we checked with realtors and said we'd really like to rent on the lake if we could. And they just laughed at us. They said, yeah, right, you know. So we put an ad in the newspaper. That was way back before emails and everything else. And we had a couple from Rochester, Dean and Artie Kristen, that had a place in Long Acres on the west side of Long Lake next to Claire and Margaret Leas. And they said, you know, we've never rented out our place, but we think it's winterized, so if you want to come out and take a look at it. So we did. On July 4th, 1976, it was 100 degrees. And I remember that because we had another friends with us, Greg and Therese Burvig. Therese walked right in the lake with her clothes on, just to cool off. But we saw that setting, and Lisa and Kari were pretty young then. But we said, yeah, we'll spend our year here. So we did. We got used to the neighborhood with, let's see, Swanson's, Cy Swanson and Helen were next to us. Ted Long lived down the way. Fred and Nora Sanford. And with Leas is right next door. I mean, how could you ask for a better neighborhood than that? So that was our introduction to Long Lake way back then. The next spring we found 5 acres north of Portage Lake, not on the lake, but in the woods. And we ended up building our first home. Then we went to a second home. Then we went to a third home. And now we are in our 4th home. Everything's on one level now. Got rid of all the steps up and down, just thinking about the future. And everything is handicap accessible, just in case my wife has to take care of me in my old age. In fact, she is much younger. She's 3 years younger. Not a lot. But when I was giving a presentation, after I retired from the classroom, I still gave presentations in schools around the state. And I was giving one in Park Rapids for the first graders. And my wife worked with the special ed students. And she came in, all these first graders were sitting on the floor in front of me. And she came in with one of her students and plopped down. And he heard my name when I was introduced. And he looked at my wife and he said, "Is that your father?" My wife looked at him, smiled, and said, "Yes, it is." So anyway, I guess the hair gives it away. As we get started here this morning, I want to, maybe many of you know the history of loons and when it became our state bird. But in 1961 is when that happened. But before that, there were other birds that were thought of as maybe being candidates for Minnesota state bird. In fact, the goldfinch, way back to the 1920s, there was a group of ladies, a conservation group in Minnesota, that pretty much unofficially made the goldfinch Minnesota state bird. But in 1961, this is what happened. A bill was introduced, and it went through, and it became our state bird. And of all 50 states, you know, a robin, the meadowlark, the cardinal are shared by different states, but the loon is not shared. Minnesota is the only state that has the common loon as its state bird. And so it's not only our state bird, I see it also as kind of our ambassador and a cultural icon. You know, you don't have to look very far to find products that have the symbol of a loon on it, whether it be cups, t-shirts, magnets for the refrigerator, whatever else. And all the places, the businesses, not only in the Park Rapids area or northern Minnesota, but way down to Rochester, the Fit Loon, a market down there. Okay, we've got the soccer team, the professional soccer team, the Loons. And so definitely, loons mean quite a bit to people. And I know that people from Iowa and other states, as they come to vacation in Minnesota, you know, they want the lakes, they want the fishing, but many of them are coming looking or listening for the loons as well. Okay, even Canada. With COVID closing down the borders, we lost a lot of Canadian business. And this kind of shows that it was 500,000 Canadians that visited Minnesota in 2019, which brought in a lot of money. So right now, there's kind of a little push in marketing to combine the maple leaf of Canada with the loon of Minnesota, you know, to try to attract, to show the connection between us and our Canadian friends. Vergas every year has their Loony Days. In fact, it takes place in August. And up in Virginia, they just last weekend had their Loon Festival. Park Rapids was going to be, or wanted to kind of be, the loon capital of Minnesota, and I'll get to that in a minute. But when you think about the call of the loon, what you hear and sometimes keeps you awake at night maybe, you know, it certainly is a wilderness call. And that's why in so many movies we hear it. You know, in Golden Pond back in 1981, they used the loon call in an appropriate way. Loons were on that lake. But if you watch some of these other movies, 1917, Harry Potter, you hear loons calling. We have loons calling from Arizona in movies, from Africa, from Vietnam, all over, from outer space. That sound of the loon is used over and over, and most of the time inappropriately. But that's how popular it is, and how identifiable it is. Okay, here was that statue that was going to be in Park Rapids. But they wanted to put it down at kind of where Simonson's is, I think, right on the corner of 31 or 34 and 71. But they worried that so many people would stop to take a picture of it. It was so big, they'd have to back up, and it would be a real traffic problem there. So evidently, it was shot down for the idea, and I don't know where that idea stands now. If it will eventually, I don't know why they couldn't put it out by the Chamber building or someplace else, but maybe it wouldn't have as much exposure out there. We'll have to check with the city council. All right. As a loon volunteer on Mantrap Lake, now I don't live on Mantrap Lake. I told you I don't live on Long Lake either. But when I retired from the classroom in 2007, I'd always heard about the loon management program at Mantrap. I got used to Mantrap way back in the 60s. I grew up in Benson, Minnesota, about 130 miles south of here, but we came to Camp Wilderness for our scout camp. So I spent summers, falls, and winters at camp on Bad Axe Lake, right next to Mantrap. In 1964, 4 of us took 2 canoes. We paddled the length of Bad Axe, portaged across the road, and went into Mantrap. We canoed through all the bays and fished along the way. And when we got up the area that we call the river into a destination of Dead Island, there were no cabins on the island. We thought, we're going to camp here tonight. And we didn't bring tents. So we made a campfire, we cooked the northerns that we had caught, and we just propped the canoes up against the trees, and we ended up sleeping underneath them. And it was during that night that I was hearing loons. And it fascinated me. I knew right then that I wanted to learn more about loons. Well, as life, takes detours, I went back home, finished high school, went to college, taught in Thief River, taught in Morid, but finally in 1976, thanks to Dean and Artie Kristen, we got back to Park Rapids. And my spring schedule with coaching and with teaching didn't allow me to be part of the nesting project because April and May were the times. So when I retired in 2007 immediately, I went up to Mantrap, met Lyle Alasky and Warden Arliss McGinnis. And they were kind enough to say, even though you don't live on the lake, we'll accept, you as one of our volunteers. So this is what we put together kind of as the duties of the volunteers up there. We get the rafts ready in the spring. We're using 20 artificial aluminum rafts that we put out around the lake. Now I say 20, and that's 20, that lake's not that big. It looks big because of the way with all the bays and everything, but it's about 1,560 acres or 1,600 acres, and yet we have 24 nesting territories, which is pretty much unheard of. And there are reasons for that, and I'll get to those in a few minutes. But anyway, so the spring raft preparation, we end up distributing the rafts the day the ice goes off the lake. We are putting the rafts in place. And each spring when we do that, usually in a few locations, the loons are already there, they're swimming right behind the boat as we put the raft in place. And they're checking it out. They're kind of looking, saying, now where have you been, We've been here for a few hours. So anyway, we do schedule loon counts. We always do a loon count right in May or after the ice goes out. We want to know how many adult loons. Now there certainly are no chicks at that time. But how many adult loons are on the lake? We've hit as many as 79. That doesn't mean all of them are staying on that lake for the summer. Some of them might be flying through to other lakes. So then we do an adult count also in July. Typically we have about 54 loons, adult loons that are on the lake. And of those 54, normally about 24 nesting pair. So that would be 48 loons right there. All right. This year we had a late spring, as you know. High water levels. All of those things we took into effect with the nesting season. Okay, so we're always collecting data. We're trying to find out how many loons are nesting. Are they nesting on natural sites? Are they nesting on our artificial rafts? How many eggs are laid? How many eggs are laid on the rafts versus on the natural nests? Are some of them getting predated by raccoons or by other things? We keep track of all that stuff. And then the hatching, which is certainly taking place now. That, it changes day by day, but right now, and I think I've got a sheet coming up on it, I'll show you how many chicks we have so far. We do an egg count. It's important to know how many eggs there are, because then as eggs start disappearing by predators, we can still keep track of how many at least were there to start with. Now when we do an egg count, how do we do that? We have to go up to the nest. Now we don't want to be disturbing or put any stress on loons, but we've learned kind of how to do that as we move in slowly, respectfully, not going right at them, but from the side. We'll slide up, and we normally get 3 behaviors. The first behavior, they'll just sit right there, we pull up. Maybe we'll be lucky enough where they just stand up. We see the eggs, we back away, we say thank you, and we're on our way. In fact, just the other day that happened. We had a nest that they abandoned 2 eggs earlier on. And they just re-nested. And we found, just by luck, we found the natural nest. And so we thought, we've got to hang a camera here. So we went back and we got a big pipe, a steel pipe. And I'm pounding that down in the muck right next to the nest. The loon's sitting just looking at it. I'm talking to it, I'm hanging a camera on it, getting it focused on. She raised up so I could see that she had 2 eggs. I said, thank you very much. We hung the camera and we backed away. She never left the nest. We didn't disturb her. That's the real, that's what we want to see. Sometimes, as we're moving in, they might just slide quietly off the nest. If they do that, we just count the eggs. We're out of there. We sit back at a distance, waiting for them to come back in to make sure we haven't caused any problem. And the third response we sometimes see is a look of annoyance. When we see that, we say, that's okay. Just sit, and we back away. We figure if they're sitting, there's at least 1 egg there. So on our charts, we'll mark down one with a question mark. Maybe at some other point, we'll get a chance to see if there's a second egg, but we don't want to disturb her. Yes?
How many, on average, eggs do they lay?
2.
Just 2?
1 or 2. There, on rare occasions, you'll get 3.
Okay.
But yeah, typically it's 2. And research shows that if they renest, like they lose their first eggs, a renest normally be 1, but we're saying many times it's 2 on the second time around too. And that's so. Okay, and then remote camera placement. In about 2008, right after I retired from school, we started placing remote cameras out so that on all the hours that we're not on the lake, we can still tell what's going on. We're monitoring for things like behavior and habits so we can learn more about loons. And by learning more about loons, that education helps us develop a better conservation program for them. And we're also monitoring for predators to see what it is and how they're coming in. And if they're coming in, how can we try to deflect that by changing something in our plan? The observations go on, and the retrieval of the rafts. Many of our rafts will start coming off the lake now either today or Monday, because most of our, I think we still have 7 or 8 nests to go, but most of them have hatched out. And then the last thing, and that's kind of where I come in too, is sharing the Man-Trap project with others. It's gone on for a number of years. It has gained a lot of notoriety and success. And we're not trying to tell other lake associations, do this. But if you can learn from it and adapt your own program with some help from this, that's great. Every lake is different, and all the loons are different. Okay? So, I do some of the writing also to give it a little bit of exposure that way. And here's our lake up there. And you can see in red all of our locations where we either have rafts or natural nests. So we had a photographer from Florida here this week that we were with. And it took me years to learn the names of all these bays and know where I was. I mean, it's like a maze, you know, and you go, where am I? And it was fun watching him this week, because we go through and photograph a family of loons, and 15, 20 minutes later, I'd come back through that same area. He said, oh, here's a family. I said, yeah, those are the ones we just photographed. Oh, you know, but it's just that kind of a lake where you can get confused. Okay. It also has become, because of our loon numbers up there, it has attracted researchers. In 2010, there was a huge BP oil spill in the Gulf. You remember that? What does that have to do with Minnesota? Many of our loons winter in the Gulf. So researchers wanted to find out, they wanted to track our loons on migration. They wanted to find out that even after the Gulf spill was cleaned up as much as they could, a lot of that residue is in the Gulf, down at the bottom. Loons are feeding on crayfish or crawfish, I suppose they call them down there. And fish, are they taking in a lot of the oil residue into their systems? Will it affect egg production or fertility? So part of their study was dealing with that. So these guys were here. Kevin Keno was the head researcher from the U.S. Geological Service in Wisconsin. And they were here in 2011, 12, and 14 capturing loons. Not only on Man-Trap, but that was one of their destinations. And I went with them each time. And in 2011, in one night, they captured 14 loons. They had never done that on any lake. And they had a veterinarian here from Florida, from the University of Gainesville. And his job was to do surgery on the adult males that were captured. He did 5 surgeries that night and implanted a satellite transmitter inside of each of them. And I was able to photograph the process and write about it. I asked him, why are you doing this only on the males? Why not the females? He said, you know, the females with egg production, we really don't want to mess around at all. And I thought, you know, these guys know what they're doing. And they're so respectful of the bird. And they had breathing habits, just like when we go under, you know, for a surgery. They were doing the same with the loons. You know, they had the breathing on them. They had sedated them. After the surgery, they made sure that the loon came out of the sedation before they were released back to the lake. And it was just fun. We spent the entire night until 5:30 the next morning, you know, doing that. Well, so that was it. This is how they would do it at night. They would use a spotlight. They would use a big musky net. And being as we were the ones, the volunteers on the lake, we knew where the loons were, we could help them by saying, oh, you'll find a family of 4 in this bay. So we were with them to do that. And they had a recorder that would make check calls. and the adults would stay close to the chicks because of that. And we'd get close with the spotlight, scoop down, and they'd grab a loon. And once they had it, they'd put it in a tote, bring it back. Maybe if it was a female or a chick, they were putting just leg bands or a geolocator on it. But if it was the male, then the surgery was performed. This was in 2014 when they came back to check on juveniles, because very little is known about juveniles. Juvenile loons, supposedly the ones that hatch out this summer, the chicks. This fall, they'll fly south for the first time on their own. The males go first, the females will follow a few weeks later, and then the juveniles are stuck on their own going, what's going on? And hopefully before ice up, they will take off. And old research shows that they will stay down south for 2.5 years, not coming back to their area where they were born until the 3rd spring. That's the old research. By putting some satellite transmitters to the juveniles, they were able to track them. And one from over by Detroit Lakes that was captured and banded and given a satellite transmitter, sure enough, the first fall, 2014, it went to the Gulf. That's where it should have gone. The next spring, it should have stayed there. That one went all the way up the east coast, Nova Scotia, or that area. Spent the summer up there. That fall, back to the Gulf, where it should be. The next spring, stay in the Gulf this time. No, up through Ontario, almost to Hudson Bay. Back to the Gulf. Now the 3rd spring, it should have gone back to the Detroit Lakes area. The battery was dead. The batteries last about 2 years. So they had no idea what happened to that juvenile. Did it die? Is it gone? All of a sudden, I had a call yesterday from Kevin Keno. I was down in Pequot Lakes, and he called, and he said, guess what? The juvenile from over by Detroit Lakes was just spotted. The colored leg bands on it, somebody saw them. We're coming up, we're going to check and verify if it is that same loon, and if it is, we're going to do a nighttime capture. It is now an adult, it's a mating adult. It has a mate, and it had either 2 eggs, or maybe the eggs have hatched by now, 2 chicks, so it has a family. But they're going to recapture it and take off. They're not going to cut into it and put a new battery in. But what they will do is there should be a geolocator on one leg. That's a type of instrument that collects data too, but doesn't send it directly back to the computer. You have to attach that to the computer to download all the stuff that's been stored in there. So they're hoping that they will be able to do that and find out where this loon has been since that time. So really some neat stuff going on. But so man trap has been used, that's the kind of leg bands they would put on. And that's the antenna that sticks out the back end. So it's a little bit weird to go out on a lake and all of a sudden say, hey, what's wrong with that loon? Oh, it's got an antenna, you know. So Netflix, I don't know. And also, because of our loon population up there, it's become a popular destination for National Geographic and Smithsonian. In 2017, National Geographic was here to film. 2019, that's Matt, that was for Smithsonian. And last spring, 2021, National Geographic came back. They were doing another special, and loons just become a small part of the program, but they knew that if they wanted loon footage, they knew where they wanted to come. And so these were the guys that came last spring. Yuzuro is a Japanese videographer. He travels all over the world. A few weeks ago, he sent an email and said, how are the loons doing? And I said, where are you? He said, I'm in Southeast Asia in the jungle. So he's doing some filming over there. He said, this is kind of a serious one. I mean, so I don't know what animals, he had around him, but it wasn't loons. And then Neil Redding. Neil has been the recipient of, I think it's 6 Emmy Awards for his work. If you ever want to see one of his things, the Philippine eagle, he did a special on that where he climbed, I don't know how far up into the trees, 100 feet or 80 feet, built a platform so he could be filming from a distance at the nest to observe, and he stayed up there, while he did all this filming to learn about them and that they were an endangered species. So they were back, we had fun spending time with them. The production company last spring was from the UK. So about a year in advance, they started emailing getting everything set up for last spring when the guys came. And so we were corresponding back and forth. I had all kinds of forms I had to fill out and sign. And they're used to doing things on the ocean. So they said, well now, what boat will you be using? How big is the boat? Is it a charter boat? What is the name of the boat? I'm going, I've got a boat, you know. So that's my boat. So they said, what's the name of the boat? So I thought, why not the Lunar Rover? So anyway, so we use that as well as Barry's boat, one of the other volunteers that lives on the lake. This is why the Man Trap project has been so successful. Two people born in Arliss McGinnis who don't want any attention drawn to them, and yet here I'm doing it. They just simply asked one question: what can we do to help our loons? So in the mid-'80s, they put out their first draft, and it was, let's see, it was this one, okay, the log one, and loons took to it. They found that predators were getting to the eggs when it was a natural nest by shore. So why not build something and put it out in the water away from shore a little bit? The loons grabbed it. So a year or two later, they started using the PVC. And again, it worked. And so there's nothing wrong with using logs, although they're heavy, and the PVC. But it is now developed into this. So we use aluminum rafts. They have a ramp, so it's easier for the loons to come and go. And the canopy that's on this is a full canopy, but we don't start out that way. If a pair of loons are not used to using an artificial raft, we leave it open for them the first year, so they don't feel too confined. But the canopy is then added, and the canopy certainly helps protect them, probably a little bit from the sun, but also from avian predators, and that too. So here is the day that we start getting everything together. We have a crew of volunteers from the lake that join together and put all the grasses. We do not use straw or hay. That has a fungus in it that will cause upper respiratory problems in loons or other birds. We use the natural vegetation from the lake. They have to get a permit for that, but Warren and Arliss and Barry, one of the volunteers, right after the ice goes on in early December, they're out there cutting all of the canary grass, the rushes, the cattails, things like that we're using. And then they store them underneath tarps over the winter. And then in the spring, we're using them to dress the rafts. Okay, here's another design. This is what we call a Type B raft. It's a very low profile raft. You can see it really looks different than this bulky one. So we use the bigger Type A rafts out where the wind might be an issue, or in more open areas. But because of that too, we have to have reflectors on them. We have to have an identification number on them with the sheriff's department. And then, okay, so here's the Type B raft, and you see the canopy on that is open on both ends. Loons can come or go either way. Let's say a predator swam out, was coming up on one end, they could at least get out the other end. So Lyle Lasky was an art instructor at Moorhead State during his career. And one of his contributions to the Loon program in Man Trap was to draw the designs of all the rafts and the changes year by year. He's never quite happy with things. It's, I think we could change this or make this a little different. And you can see, even on back to this one, I don't know if you can see the plywood. Well, we've now gone to total aluminum. Plywood eventually is going to rot, and we have to replace it. So what we do each year is we get a few new rafts, we sell off the older rafts. They're still great, they still work. And maybe Long Lake has been the recipient of a few of those, other lakes have too. And then we get the newer models that we have. So now I think our 20 rafts, I think are all aluminum with no plywood on them. But that aluminum doesn't that heat up. What we do is we rough them up, we spray them so they're not as shiny, and then we end up using this kind of this indoor-outdoor carpeting that might be like in boats sometimes too. We use a spray glue and put that on the ramp and up in the area. So, you know, it's cooler, but also they've got something that isn't slippery. You know, for them trying to get up on the aluminum, you know, might be a good video of America's Funny Video because they'd be sliding down probably. But so anyway, we get together as a group. It's a fun day to talk about things. And we use a nesting ring in the middle. We use plastic tie downs, we put that down, and hopefully the loons will nest within the ring. It helps keep the eggs from rolling off the nest. Now, most of the time, the loons are trained and they do that. But once in a while, they'll lay their eggs outside of the nesting ring. That's the way it goes. We keep a chart. Our list does this every year that tells us, as we're putting the rafts out around the lake, which number raft goes in which location, what anchors, is it a 20-pound anchor, a 28-pound anchor, depending on the wind and the depth of the lake in that area. So all of that is kept too, and we follow that. Whether that raft is a type A or a type B, whether it is a full canopy, no canopy, a partial canopy. Okay, here's the boat we now use. This was Lyle Lasky's fishing boat. When he got a new boat, he said, you know, I'm not going to sell my other boat. He said, it works great for the Loon project, so let's just make it the Loon boat. So he donated it to the Loon project. So Barry and I tried to come up with a good name. Lunar Rover was already taken. So we simply called it the Loon boat. So if people see us out in the lake and use a binocular saying, hey, that boat's out there kind of close to that loon raft, oh, it's the Loon boat, you know, and they know us, and they know we're not going to be trying to put stress on the birds or anything else. So that's Barry Guptill. He lives on the lake, and he's our representative or our connection on the lake itself, because I don't live there. Okay, and there's one of the type A rafts. You can see the loon on it. Turtles come up to sun themselves. Those turtles are not a threat. Here's a type B raft. In fact, for this particular loon in that area, it always had a natural nest right on the very shallow. It was a rocky point. Every year, raccoons found the eggs and took them. We thought, you dummy. But we thought, okay, we'll see what we can do. So we put a type B raft right there on the rocks. She nested on it. We moved in with the boat. I picked up the anchor ropes. Barry backed up the boat. We dragged her out from shore. She just sat there watching us. And we anchored out away from shore. Successful nest. Okay. All right. And you can see here we put a buoy out that says nesting area, you know, please stay out. And if you can see it on the raft, there's one of our cameras, just a trail camera. But so that we can monitor things when we're not there. Sometimes that loon's not going to take a raft. Even if we put it there, there's a natural nest. No, sorry, I want this instead. Now, for this particular area of the lake, they've done that year after year. They've ignored our raft. Well, this year with the water levels higher, they didn't have their natural places out there. So we put a type B, one of the flat rafts, and sure enough, they took to it. It's success for about 10 days. Then they abandoned their 2 eggs. For what reason? I have no idea. It wasn't a predator. Well, unless there were a lot of pelicans that kept swimming around, maybe eventually the loon just got, you know, upset. It could have been black flies that caused them to abandon. But so those 2 eggs just sat there. And as we went by that in the mornings, we kept seeing this pair of loons over towards shore more. And one morning I said, Barry, there's got to be a natural nest. Maybe they re-nested. And we went in and sure enough they did. And that was the one I just said that I was pounding the pipe down and she just sat there looking at me. So again, 2 more eggs. So hopefully they'll make it this time. But it'll be a late hatch. We keep a chart. And it's always being updated by Barry. You know, so we can tell when in each territory, when did they start sitting? So we can estimate the day the eggs were laid. And the eggs are not laid the same day. It might be the next day, 2, 3 days later, that second egg is laid. I've been fortunate enough to be there at an egg count at the exact time that a female was laying her second egg. In 2012, Lyle and I pulled in to do an egg count, and the female raised up, and we said, 1 egg, and Lyle started backing away, and I said, wait a minute. He said, what? She was acting differently. She was raising up and sitting down, raising up and sitting. I said, Lyle, she's going to lay her second egg while we're here. She didn't mind that we were there to watch. I filmed the whole thing as that egg started coming in all. But yeah, what a neat experience for a photographer or a science teacher. Okay, and then we keep at the end of each season, we kind of tabulate everything. In 2018, we had 23 nests, 44 eggs were laid. And, you know, the percentages of different things here too. 15 eggs didn't hatch for whatever reasons. And And for this year, this is kind of an up-to-date as of a few days ago. Ice out was May 7th. On Long Lake, I'm sure it was somewhere close to that. Okay, we had 48, only 48, but I think because those extra loons that would normally be found on the lake, probably with the late ice, they just flew on to wherever they were going. But so we kind of keep track of all this as we're going, okay? And our chart to show the difference between the artificial rafts and the natural nests. Natural nests are the red. You can see the success rate. 2012, about 33 or 34% of the eggs hatched. But on the rafts that year, 61%. Now that is what makes Mantrap catch the eyes of a person like Carol Henderson, who was the DNR's non-game supervisor for 40-some years. Carol calls the Mantrap project the gold standard for loon management. And coming from Carol, that means a lot. But it shows that the rafts help. Okay, on that lake especially. Other lakes might be different. Okay, limiting factors. Yeah.
Can you go back? Why was 2017 so low?
Just every year is, you know, every time we think we know something about loons, they surprise us. And in 2017, they were almost the same with a natural nest. But you know how figures can tell stories or you can manipulate them. If there's only one natural nest on the lake and you lose the eggs or one of them hatches, you've got 50%, you know. Where if it's 18 rafts and more eggs, and you know, so you play around with that. And so sometimes we don't put a lot of, you know, faith in that, but it's good for the records to keep track of it. Okay, so limiting factors. When the loons are sitting on the eggs, typically we think, that's got to be boring. I mean, I watch wood ducks in the wood duck boxes too, and I put a camera inside the boxes. Because for 27 days or she's just sitting in there. I think that's got to be boring. She doesn't have a DVD player. I don't have any posters on the walls in the wood duck box or anything for her. So loons too, what do they go through during that time of incubation? Well, let's take a look. Okay, first of all, a little bit of a video of what we're trying to get to, the hatching itself. So you see the first chick is hatched. And the second egg is still there. The adult, boy, they just plop down. Those eggshells are tough on a loon egg. They have to be, because those adults are not gentle. They're pretty awkward. But yeah, just kind of, hey, you know, sister or brother, come out so we can get going. And even during this time, the other adult came in with a fish. The chick went off the nest, got fed, and then climbed back up on the nest. And so it's just fun being able to monitor those things. Okay, so some of the limiting factors that we're looking at, some of them are caused by nature itself. It might be the weather, red tide, territorial battles, nest disturbances, and predators. But humans also cause disturbance, so we're just going to look briefly at some of those. Here's a location that probably isn't a good location. Look at the wave action coming from either direction on that could certainly wash the eggs away, or the water levels could rise, and not too much protection. Here's the cold weather in the spring. Okay, and again, you can see this because we have a trail camera, a game camera monitoring this. We can tell when it was, April 23rd, 2017. The day before that was 70 degrees. That morning, Barry and I went out, we had to shovel snow out of the loon boat. And that's what we were seeing on the nests. Okay, down south, not here, but where our loons winter, down by Florida, red tide becomes an issue. An algae bloom that goes crazy and kills off all the fish, and will kill loons as well. Also in the Lake Michigan food web, many of our loons go to Lake Michigan for a little while before they head south in the fall. And loons are dying because of type E botulism that appears in the food web. You see this where it says up here, 80,000 shorebirds have been killed in the last 15 years. This was a headline in their newspaper. And down at the bottom, a variety of water birds, but 48% of the mortalities estimated during a 10-year period were common loons. That's a lot of loons. And Minnesota has about 12,000 loons, more than any of the other states, like we said, in the lower 48. Okay. The territorial disputes. A pair of loons, the males come back first in the spring. The females and males probably don't even see each other all over the winter months. But they come back, the male comes back first, starts kind of deciding on his territory or getting back into his old territory. Females come to join him, but once in a while, a new male pops up saying, hey, I'm taking you on. I like this female and I like this territory. Or it could be a new female even, but typically the males. So we get a little of the posturing taking place, trying to show this other one, I'm here and she's mine. You know? And fighting, going at this. Some lousy pictures, I know, but I had to go with the conditions. It was very dark and cloudy that day. But fighting each other, typically it'll just be a push and shove match, and one is weaker and takes off. But loons have been found dead also with stab wounds in their chest. That beak is a weapon. And so that does happen. And here is basically the chase that takes place. Get out of my territory. And because, again, of their solid bone structure, they can't take off the water like a mallard does. They are running, and you've seen that on Long Lake, sometimes up to a quarter mile before they can actually gain flight. Okay. Other disturbances on the nest. When a loon lays down like this, and they might just be tired, but a lot of times it's the first sign that something's wrong, and they're trying to hide. Well, in this case, it wasn't me that was causing it. It was a merganser with their new little ducklings that was going by. And a little too close. Loons are very territorial. So the loon on the nest let out some kind of little message, or an email, or a text, and the male came by underwater, going toward that merganser, and exploded right at the mother. Now, the loon was certainly big enough to kill the merganser, but in this case, the merganser was lucky. All the loon was doing is saying, hey, you're too close, get out of here. But what I thought was interesting is a lot of you have seen like a robin or a killdeer, when they're disturbed, they'll play like they've got the broken wing to try to move you away from their eggs or their little ones. That's what she's doing. Her ducklings are moving around up here. There they are. They're going the other direction. She's pulling the loon off to the left while they're going to safety to the right. And I thought, even when her life's being threatened, she's a mom. You know, she's protecting those. Okay, and then the loon, after he got the merganser out there, just said, okay, honey, everything's fine. And switched places on the nest. Kind of the eggs are hidden there. Well, this wood duck wasn't quite as lucky. This one sat on one of the rafts with a duckling, and the next morning, that's what was left. So Loon came back in, probably grabbed the duckling and squeezed its neck between the bill or the beak and killed it. And that makes this really rare. Okay, this loon family adopted a mallard duckling. It's, you know, I always look at that, and it's a little out of focus that was back in the film days too. But it's like the two adults are looking at each other going, it's not my side of the family. You know? And it was the duckling riding on the back. You know? The poor little loons are going, hey mom, you know, what are we, chopped liver? You know? So anyway, there's Lyle putting down one of the trail cameras back in 2008 when we started monitoring things. You can see an egg right here, and the camera's right there. And these are the culprits that do a lot of the damage, and here they came at night. The whole family. Night on trail cameras is not real good quality, but at least it documents what's going on. And all that was left are the shells. Okay, another raccoon raiding the nest. Okay, here's the trail camera. When I have to change the SD cards on the trail camera, that's how close I am. Barry's in the back of the boat, motoring it into position. I'm reaching out to the camera right by the loon, talking quietly to the loon, saying, everything's fine, everything's fine. Opening the camera, taking the SD card out, putting a new one in, or maybe changing the camera itself, if that works better. And the loon just sits there watching. You know, and kind of said, is this my good side? So, anyway. Okay, the black flies. Black flies are terrible in the spring sometimes. Look at on the head. And here you can see the leg bands on this one too. So that was one that was captured. Okay, crows, predators for eggs. Here are the loons on our natural site. A few hours later, there's a crow checking things out. Okay. Here, Real estate, location, location, location. You know that as Long Lake residents. But here, that's a neat natural nesting site that's used every year. But there are the loons in that position. Well, there's a muskrat, if you can see it right there. There aren't any eggs yet, but the muskrat's just sitting there resting. Well, there's a mallard. That's a pretty nice place. Well, the swan or the pelicans decided, yeah, we'll swim around this area. A goose decides to stand on it. The loons came back to it. You can see the dates down here too. I'm not following through with that. And they copulated right on the nest. And many times the research says they will go up on the shore to copulate. We're finding it takes place on the nest, even if it's a raft. You know, they will copulate on that as well. Okay, a wood duck checks out the nesting site. Oh, mallards again, and a teal's there. There's a wood duck in the back. Crow checks it out. A swan decides to swim by. How about a heron? And finally, the loons are back. So all of that's taking place on a nesting site. That we wouldn't know any of that if we did not have cameras there to check that out. Okay. So here, a loon nested on this little point. It left the nest. The gull was sitting right there, and sure enough, that was the result. Okay, here's a little video at nighttime. Again, quality is bad, but the loon, you see her flaring up. Watch from behind. The grass is starting to move back there. Here comes a raccoon. Gonna raid the eggs. That loon said, not tonight, and chased it away. So some loons, I think, would just give up the ship and leave. This one decided, nope, I'm not. So otters, they're fun to watch. They're playful, but they are predators. Here's one raiding a nest at night. And there's a mink taking an egg out of the nesting ring on a raft. The egg was too big for the mink to get in its mouth, but it rolled it off into the water. And the other one it left, it had hatched out about 7 days later. Okay, the first egg was laid here on May 18th. This time, we did not get this set right. It shows January 3rd, so don't go by that. All right, but the first egg was laid on May 18th, and the second one probably a day or two later, all of a sudden there was the eagle sitting on the nest. Now, people used to say, do eagles eat eggs? I said, we've never documented that, but we certainly know they take the chicks. Well, this particular time, the eagle did not take the eggs. Maybe they were hard-boiled or, whoops, that's my phone, appropriately, what do you expect? So, and those eggs were still there a few days later, but last year, this eagle landed on the loon nest. You can see the loon flaring up out front, and that eagle sat there for over 4 minutes, and the eggs were gone, when it left. So it definitely took the eggs. Oh, it'll quit down in a minute. Perfect timing, but enough's enough. Here's a raft, a log raft, and the pelican just swimming all the way around it. It didn't disturb the loon enough where it would abandon the nest, but they can be a problem. Herons flying in to land right on top of you can be a problem. Okay, another little one. A beaver's not going to be eating the eggs, but just decided to rest up on the raft, but the loon didn't appreciate it. But see what trail cameras can do? They can be so much fun. Okay. Turtles, not disturbing them. Muskrat, not disturbing them. Okay. Then finally we get to the hatch. Great. But remember that once they hatch, they're not out of danger yet. Now it didn't matter whether it was a raft or a natural nest. Now they're chicks swimming around out there, and all kinds of things are looking for meals. Okay. So here's a chick sitting next to waiting for the second egg to hatch. Here's one peeking out from under the wing. Here's what the chicks look like. Now that's not my fault. Okay? But these guys are always watching. And you can see the one on the right's already at a meal. Okay, all the blood around its face. This loon is watching an eagle flying over, tilting its head and watching above. You can also see the antenna on this one. I always thought I should draw little earphones or something on the chick as it's trying to tune in to a better radio station. Okay, and there's the eagle flying over. Now, if this eagle can pick up a northern, it can certainly pick up a loon chick. Okay, riding on the back for warmth, for protection, for just resting. But notice the loon again looking down below. Could be looking for food sources, but also might be looking for that northern or that muskie or that snapping turtle that wants a meal. Okay, so always on the alert. Okay. Again, one looking down below, one with the antenna swimming, watching above. There's a northern from below. There's a snapping turtle, predators for the chicks. And then we get to, so those are a lot of the natural limiting factors or problems that we might have. But we also get to it with us. Now, 4th of July is coming up on Long Lake as well as the other lakes. We're not saying that all the boaters and all the people out there are trying to be cruel to loons or that they are disrespectful. They're just busy doing their water stuff and maybe not watching as closely as they could. Adult loons, typically you can see them if you're watching, but they dive a lot and pop up. But chicks are pretty hard to see. So things do happen. And most of the time I want to believe that it's by mistake, not on purpose. So here's a trail cam on a raft. It got a dog. The guy in the boat stays back, but the dog is right there looking at the nest. Okay? The fishermen I have to appreciate this. They're staying outside of the zone, but they're casting in there. And every year loons are caught. They're going after bait fish, which could be a minnow or something too. This guy, when I photographed him, I thought, uh-oh, this jet ski, it's going to come right through those loons. But no. He slowed up. He had a kid with him. He stayed over to the side. They even shut it off so they could watch the loons. And then he went on his way. And I thought, what a good role model. And hopefully the youngster will learn from that as well. Okay, here's fish line that was discarded, maybe not on purpose, maybe it was discarded in the boat. When the boat took off, the wind, blew it out of the boat, but the loon got tangled up in it. Okay, here's a leader, a steel leader. In 2019, when Matt was here with Smithsonian, I saw this loon. I said, Matt, there's something wrong with that loon. We've got to go take a look. And sure enough, we saw that, and under the wing was a huge plug with treble hooks. But the nice thing about it was the treble hooks weren't really embedded in the loon. It was the fish line that was wrapped around the wing. And then a little closer look. Okay, and that brings us to what's going on now with turning in the lead. Okay, and some of you have seen this slide before, or this. And as Sharon goes over things too, you might be talking about that. Here's a gizzard with, again, with a light, it might be hard to see it, but it was a split shot sinker in it. Here, a lot of shotgun BBs. So someone, I don't think they mistook a loon for a goose or anything else, but they shot it on purpose. Yeah. Okay? So here are the things that we've looked at. Okay? We might be able to, would not be able to do things with, like the weather conditions, the natural predators and that, but the boat behavior, the fishing ethics, the nest disturbance, all of those things, which Long Lake is very, very in tune with. Those things we can do. And then, some of you know this, the lead was removed from paint way back in 78. Okay, in 75, lead was beginning to be phased out of gasoline. Okay, lead shot for waterfowl on it was outlawed back in 1991. And yet still, this many years later, we're struggling to get it out of the areas that affect eagles, loons, anything else that might swallow. Okay? The monitoring program, and you guys know more about that maybe than I do, but with different counties, and Hubbard isn't even on this one, but showing what's happened over the last 10 years. But here on the restoration program that's going on now, these are the 8 counties that have been targeted. Hubbard County is one of those. All right? At one time, the Biodiversity Institute from way out east decided to capture loons and try to transplant them, to bring them back into a range where, way back maybe in the 1800s they were, way down by Mankato. And they did that in 2014, but I emailed them last month and I said, whatever became of that? They didn't have any success with that. They did in New York. So here's what the funding from the BP oil spill is highlighted. At the bottom, the acquisition, the easements of shoreline, protect common loon nesting, enhancing loon productivity with the artificial nesting platforms, and engaging the lake associations, which you are definitely doing on Long Lake. The money that's available is renewable every 3 years, up to 15 years, if things go the way they should go, which is great. That's wonderful. So they get the let out. There's Carol Henderson, who wrote the proposal, the BPOL, and Carol is he's a part of it. He looks like a kid in a candy shop when you see him doing his work. Here are the people now that are dealing with two different things in Minnesota. The Loon Restoration Project, Robert Basco and Liz and Spencer. The MPCA, the pollution control, the get the let out part is being covered by them. And then also, and I don't know how much you've heard about the National Loon Center that's proposed for Cross Lake. They are collecting money, they are raising money. Now 2024 is the date they're hoping that they will have that building up. And that's what it'll look like. Now it's for loon education, but also there's certainly the commercial end of it, where they're hoping this will attract many people to the lake also. And, but it's all hopefully for loons. Okay. To your lake, you're already doing so much. But my suggestions, and you've already done it, I think, identify the current nesting territories that are used on the lake. Enlist the help of a family, and I'll come back to that in a second, within sight of each nest to monitor that activity. It's pretty hard with the length of Long Lake for one person living down by Hubbard to be checking the entire lake day after day after day. So someone that lives in that area, if they can kind of be watching what's going on, document any egg predation, design a plan to increase the hatching success. If you've got successful sites, don't mess with them. There's no raft, there's no artificial raft that's needed if you've got a natural nest that is hatching out eggs year after year. Why mess with that? They're doing their thing. And then I said, generational sustainability. On Mantrap, I'm probably the youngest volunteer. I'm 72. What's going to happen in the years to come when we can't do it anymore? Who's going to take over? So, by involving the younger generation in maybe making those rafts, even if they're PVC pipe ones, get them involved. And that's why I said family-oriented with the different generations. You build this into it, and the kids and the grandkids, in the years to come, may continue with that. Here's the Eagle Scout project. Okay. My Eagle Scout project was building wood duck boxes, and I'm still monitoring wood ducks this many years later. But Eagle Scout project, building loon rafts. Here's another Eagle Scout with his project. In Parker's Prairie, high school students did a project where they made a raft and put it out. Sure enough, the loons used it. Okay? So, it's up to us. I just hope that as we leave here today, you can ask that same question that Ward and Marlis asked themselves way back in the mid-'80s. What can we do to help? But thank you very much.